The morning light filtered through the tall glass walls of Voss Enterprises, casting sharp lines across the polished marble floor. Isla Moreno moved quickly, her notebook pressed to her chest as she weaved through the labyrinth of executives. She had been working as an assistant here for only 3 months, yet every day still felt like stepping into a foreign land, a place built on power, wealth, and the kind of ruthless ambition that left no room for mistakes. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Most of the women in this building wore designer shoes, carried bags worth more than her entire year's rent, and spoke in crisp voices that carried the weight of legacy. Isla had none of that. She came from a small apartment 2 subway stops away from the wrong side of the city, a place where the walls were thin and the heating rarely worked. But she had something that had carried her further than anyone expected: grit. It was the one thing she refused to let anyone strip from her. Today was supposed to be simple: take notes in the board meeting, pour coffee, and stay invisible. That was the rule when it came to Damian Voss, the man who owned half the skyline, who turned failing companies into gold, who silenced competitors with a single glance. He was called the Lion by those who dared whisper about him in the hallways, not just because of his name, but because of the way he prowled through life, dominant and untouchable. Isla had only seen him once before, from a distance, when he strode through the lobby surrounded by men in suits who seemed to bend toward his presence. Up close, he was larger than life. Broad shoulders that seemed made to carry kingdoms, sharp eyes the color of storm clouds, and an energy that filled the room like static before a storm. The boardroom hushed the moment he entered, every head bowing slightly as though in unspoken submission. The meeting began with his deep, controlled voice carrying across the table. He spoke with authority, words clipped, decisive, leaving no space for argument. Charts glowed on the massive screen behind him, numbers rising and falling like the pulse of an empire. Isla scribbled quickly, trying to keep up, though her heart beat harder than her pen could move. Then it happened. Damian leaned back, his hand brushing across the table as he made a statement about quarterly growth. The numbers were wrong. Isla had double-checked them herself that morning while preparing the reports. For a second, she froze, her throat tightening. Correcting him here, in front of the entire board, was unthinkable. Assistants didn't speak unless spoken to. People who crossed Damian Voss rarely kept their jobs past sunrise. But before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "Actually, sir," she said, her voice steady, though her palms were damp. "The percentage is 12.4, not 14.1. The projections show a dip in the 3rd quarter, not a rise." The room froze. Forks of silence cut through the air. Every pair of eyes swung to her, wide with disbelief, horror, and a kind of collective gasp that seemed to shake the air itself. Isla felt her chest tighten, her body locking as if bracing for impact. This was it, the moment her short-lived career at Voss Enterprises ended. She could already imagine security walking her out of the glass doors, her name erased from the system like she had never existed. But Damian didn't explode. He didn't shout or dismiss her like a child. Slowly, he turned his head, those storm-colored eyes locking on hers. The weight of his gaze pressed into her like a physical force, so intense she had to grip her notebook to stop her hands from trembling. Instead of anger, there was something else flickering there, something sharper. Intrigue. He leaned forward, the room still, while holding its breath. "Is that so?" His voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, the kind of edge that made grown men sweat. "Yes," Isla said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. She didn't look away. She couldn't. Something inside her refused to bow, even though her heart was pounding hard enough to ache. For a long moment, Damian simply studied her. It felt less like a glance, and more like a lion appraising prey, deciding whether to devour it or let it live. The silence stretched, suffocating, until finally, he gave a faint nod, his lips curving ever so slightly. "She's right," he said, turning back to the screen. "Adjust the numbers. We'll revisit this in the next quarter." The board scrambled to obey, but no one dared look at Isla. Their faces were pale, their hands moving quickly, desperate to erase the tension that still hung in the air. Isla sat frozen in her chair, her chest tight, her pulse wild. She had expected fury. She had expected to be broken. But what she got instead was far worse. Damian Voss had noticed her, and when his gaze lingered on her one last time before moving on, there was no mistaking it. She had provoked the lion, and now she had his attention. The city never truly slept, but inside the towering walls of Voss Enterprises, the silence after the storm of the morning meeting was heavier than any midnight street. Isla could still feel the weight of Damian Voss's eyes on her even hours later. The image of him leaning back in his chair like a predator who had just caught the scent of something new haunted her. She had corrected him once. She had dared, and instead of anger, he had given her something far worse. His attention. She tried to lose herself in the endless tasks piled on her desk. Schedules to organize, emails to draft, calls to confirm. But every shadow seemed sharper now. Every footstep in the hallway felt heavier. When the elevator doors slid open, she found herself holding her breath, waiting to hear if it was him. Her co-workers whispered around her, glancing her way as if she had done something insane. No one corrected Damian Voss. No one challenged the lion. Late in the afternoon, her phone rang. The number flashing across the screen froze her blood. Executive line, Damian's office. She picked it up, her voice betraying a tremor she wished she could hide. "Mr. Voss would like to see you," his secretary said calmly. No explanation, just an order. The walk down the corridor toward his private office felt endless. Every assistant she passed lowered their eyes. The double doors loomed before her, tall, dark, and carved like the gates of a fortress. When she stepped inside, the air shifted. His office was vast, lined with tall windows that overlooked the city skyline. Damian sat behind a massive desk, his suit jacket draped over the chair, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing forearms that looked carved from stone. He didn't look up immediately. He signed something, his pen scratching against paper before setting it down with deliberate slowness. Finally, he raised his head, and his eyes locked on hers. The silence between them was deafening. Then he spoke, his voice low, steady, and dangerous. "You corrected me in front of my board today." Her throat tightened. "Yes, sir," she answered, forcing her voice to remain steady. He rose from his chair, every movement fluid like an animal circling its prey. He came around the desk until he stood just a breath away from her. "Do you know what happens to people who humiliate me, Isla?" She swallowed hard, but she refused to back down. "I didn't mean to humiliate you. I only meant to give the correct numbers." The faintest curve touched his lips, not quite a smile, more like a warning. "You think honesty will save you?" He tilted his head, studying her as though she were a puzzle he could not solve. "Most people fear me. But you look at me like you want to fight me." Her chest rose and fell quick. "I'm not here to fight anyone. I'm here to do my job." Her chest rose and fell quickly. "I'm not here to fight anyone. I'm here to do my job." That answer only seemed to intrigue him more. He moved closer, his voice dropping until it was almost a whisper. "Then why does it feel like you enjoy provoking me?" Heat spread through her, though she didn't understand why. She stood her ground, refusing to step back even though his presence was overwhelming. She expected fury, but what she found in his eyes was far more dangerous. Hunger. He leaned just enough for her to feel the weight of his gaze against her skin. "I should fire you," he said softly. "But instead I find myself wanting to see what you'll do next." The room seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with unspoken tension. For the first time, Isla realized she had crossed into a territory few dared enter. She wasn't just another assistant anymore. She was prey caught in the lion's sight. And the most dangerous part of all was the quiet part of her that didn't want to run. The night of the gala arrived, cloaked in glitter and secrets. The building that hosted the charity event shimmered with chandeliers that spilled golden light over marble floors, polished to glass. Black cars lined the street outside, one after another, each carrying names that carried weight in finance, politics, and society. Isla had been ordered to attend, though she knew she did not belong among gowns stitched with diamonds and men whose cufflinks were worth more than her yearly salary. Damian Voss had made it clear that she was to stand at his side tonight, and she had no choice but to obey. The moment they entered the grand hall, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations dropped to whispers, cameras turned, and heads swiveled to watch. Damian moved like a storm contained in a black suit, the sheer force of his presence parting the crowd. He barely touched Isla's arm, guiding her forward, but the heat of his hand burned in to her skin. She wore the only evening dress she owned, a simple navy gown that hugged her figure modestly. Yet beside him, even in its simplicity, she drew eyes. Some curious, some envious, some sharp with disdain. Isla felt the weight of it all pressing down, but she refused to shrink. Her steps matched his, her chin lifted as though she belonged even when every instinct screamed that she didn't. Damian glanced at her, once his storm-colored eyes lingering, as if he too noticed the defiance in her posture. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something that unsettled her more than his silence. The evening unfolded in waves of speeches, laughter, and clinking glasses. Isla stayed close at Damian's side, listening quietly as powerful men tried to win his attention. When one of them, a silver-haired magnate, made a comment about Damian's empire being untouchable, Damian accepted the praise with cold arrogance. But when Isla caught sight of the chart on the projector behind them, she noticed a glaring error in the figures. Her pulse raced. She should stay silent. This was not her world. But before she could stop herself, the words slipped out again, steady and clear. "Those numbers don't match the report we finalized last week." The silence that followed was suffocating. Heads turned. The magnate's smile faltered, and Damian turned to her slowly, his gaze narrowing. Isla braced for fury, certain she had gone too far. But instead he leaned down, his voice low and sharp against her ear. "You just can't help yourself, can you, little dove?" Then, before the crowd could read the tension, he straightened, and with a movement that stole the breath from everyone present, he slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. The air thickened. Guests stared, their whispers buzzing like bees. Damian smiled, the smile of a man who knew exactly what power felt like. "She is correct," he said, his voix ice-deep, carrying across the hall. "Adjust the figures. I will not have my empire misrepresented." The magnate stammered his apology, but no one was looking at him. All eyes were on Damian and the woman at his side, the predator and the girl who dared to provoke him. Later, as the orchestra played, Damian led Isla onto the dance floor. His hand pressed against the small of her back, guiding her in slow, deliberate steps. Around them, couples swayed, but the air between them felt dangerous, charged with something unspoken. His lips brushed close to her ear. "Do you understand what you've done, Isla? You've turned the entire room into witnesses. They'll all remember this night, not for the charity, not for the speeches, but because you dared to correct me again." Her chest tightened, yet she did not look away from him. "Maybe I'm not afraid to be remembered," she whispered back. For a moment his storm-colored eyes flared with something wild, untamed, and as he held her closer, moving with a predator's grace, Isla realized the truth. She hadn't just survived provoking the lion. She had ignited something inside him, something fierce and hungry. And from this moment on, there would be no going back. The days after the gala hung heavy with tension that Isla could feel in every corner of the building. Whispers followed her now wherever she went. Assistants lowered their voices when she entered the room. Board members glanced at her with suspicion, and even the cleaning staff seemed to look at her differently. She had stood in front of the city's elite beside Damian Voss, and he had chosen not to silence her. That was enough to mark her as dangerous in the eyes of everyone who served him. But it was not their stares that unsettled her most. It was his. Damian's presence became more constant, like a shadow she could not escape. He summoned her for tasks that other assistants could easily have handled. Meetings late into the night, dinners. She was required to attend briefings where her opinion was asked. For though she never understood why, he studied her more than he spoke, watching her reactions as if searching for the limits of her defiance. She felt the pull of it in her chest, the same way prey must feel the heat of a predator's breath just before the pounce. One evening she entered his office with files tucked under her arm. The city lights stretched endlessly behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing his silhouette in a cold glow. He wasn't working. He was sitting there in silence, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, staring out into the night. For the first time, Isla saw not the lion everyone feared, but something else. A man carved by solitude. "You are late." His voice broke the silence, though it was softer than usual. The trains were delayed. She answered quickly, then added before she could stop herself, I thought a man like you would already know everything happening in this city. For a heartbeat, she thought she had gone too far, but then his lips curved into the faintest smirk. Most people would not dare speak to me like that, he said. Most people are afraid of you, she replied, steadying her voice. And you are not? He asked, rising from his chair. He walked toward her slowly, every step deliberate until the space between them was charged with something dangerous. His eyes locked on hers. Tell me, Isla, do you know what people say about me outside these walls? That you are ruthless, that you destroy anything that stands in your way, she answered, her fingers tightening on the files. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. They are not wrong, he murmured, but they do not know why. My father built an empire of blood and betrayal. I tore it apart piece by piece to build my own. I learned to bite before I was bitten. That is why they fear me. For the first time, Isla saw the crack in the armor. There was pain in his voice, buried beneath the steel. For a moment she wanted to look away, but couldn't. Instead, she said quietly, and does it ever get lonely, being feared by everyone? The words seemed to hit him harder than she expected. His jaw tightened, his chest rose sharply, as if she had struck something he kept buried deep. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You provoke me with numbers in front of my board, with truth in front of my enemies, and now you provoke me with questions no one else dares to ask. Tell me, Isla, do you enjoy dancing with fire? Her breath caught in her throat. She should have stepped back. She should have lowered her gaze, but instead, she held her ground. Maybe I am not afraid of getting burned, she whispered back. The silence that followed was electric. His gaze fixed on her with a hunger that made her skin tingle. In that moment, Isla realized she had seen something no one else had glimpsed behind the ruthless empire, a man with scars that had never healed. And though it terrified her more than anything she had ever faced, it also drew her closer. She had not just provoked the lion. She had awakened the wounded man behind the roar. The storm broke inside his office, not outside. It was late, the city already sinking into darkness, when Isla found herself summoned again. She entered with her notebook ready, but the air was different tonight, heavy charged with something unseen. Damian was pacing behind his desk, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled, his movements restless like a predator, confined too long in a cage. The moment he saw her, his steps stopped and his gaze locked on her with a force that made her heart stumble. You disobeyed me today. His voice was low, not raised, but it carried the weight of a threat. At the morning briefing I told you to stay silent, yet you spoke to the investors. Do you realize what you've done? Isla gripped her notebook tighter, her pulse pounding. I only told them the truth, she said, steady, though her chest burned. They deserve to know the risk before they put their money in. The silence that followed was dangerous. Damian moved from behind the desk, his stride long, deliberate, until he stood right before her. His shadow swallowed her smaller frame. Do you know what happens to people who defy me, Isla? He asked, his words roughened by something more than anger. She should have bowed her head, she should have apologized, but something inside her refused. You keep asking me that, but I am still here, she replied. Maybe it is not me who should be afraid. Maybe it is you. The words hung in the air like a blade. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened, and for a moment she thought she had gone too far. But then he stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His voice dropped into a whisper that curled against her ear. You think I am afraid of you? Her breath caught, yet she didn't move. Maybe afraid of what I make you feel, she answered softly before she could stop herself. That was the moment the last thread snapped. His hand shot out not to harm but to seize her wrist, pulling her notebook from her grasp, letting it fall forgotten to the floor. His other hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face up to his. His storm-gray eyes burned into hers, wild, unrestrained. For weeks he had stalked around her with control, but now it shattered like glass. He kissed her, fierce, sudden, claiming. It wasn't the polished charm of a billionaire, it was raw hunger unmasked. She gasped against him, her hands pressed against his chest, but instead of pushing him away, she found herself clutching the fabric of his shirt. His mouth moved against hers, demanding yet aching as if he had been starving, and she was the only thing that could save him. When he finally tore his lips from hers, his forehead rested against hers, his breath ragged. "I should fire you," he said, his voice trembling with something almost vulnerable. "I should drive you out of this place before you ruin me." Her own chest heaved, her lips still tingling from the force of him. "Then why don't you?" she whispered. "Because you have already ruined me." He admitted, his grip tightening as though letting her go would undo him entirely. "You provoke me, you defy me, you make me lose control, and for a man like me that is dangerous." The air between them quivered with the truth neither wanted to speak. Isla's body trembled not from fear but from the terrifying realization that she wanted him too. Against every rule, every reason, every voice in her head, she had crossed a line she could never step back from. And as Damian pulled her closer again, his kiss deeper, fiercer, Isla understood that she had not only provoked the lion, she had unleashed him. And now there was no turning back. The days after that first kiss unfolded like a dangerous dream. Every corner of the mansion-like office building seemed charged with the memory of his mouth on hers, his hand gripping her jaw as though he could never let her go. Isla told herself it was a mistake, told herself she would keep her distance, but every time Damian entered a room, the air itself shifted, dragging her back into the gravity of his presence. He had changed toward her, but not in the way she expected. He did not soften. If anything, he became more dangerous. His eyes followed her like a shadow. His voice dropped low when he spoke her name. His touch lingered when it should not have. He called her into his office for the smallest matters, yet when she stood before him, he would say little, simply watching her as if waiting for her to break. The staff noticed. Whispers spread through hallways. Meetings grew tense as executives caught the strange undercurrent between their ruthless employer and the young woman who had dared to challenge him. Some treated her with wary respect, others with quiet resentment. They had seen men destroyed for less, yet here she woo, as alive in the lion's den, perhaps even protected by him. One evening she was working late, her desk lit only by the lamp at the corner, when the elevator opened. She knew without looking that it was him. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the empty corridor, steady, deliberate. He stopped at her desk, his presence filling the silence. "You should have gone home hours ago," he said. "I had work to finish," she replied, forcing her voice to stay even. He leaned down, resting his hand on the edge of her desk, so close that she could smell the faint trace of whiskey and expensive cologne. "Work, or were you trying to avoid me, Isla?" Her chest tightened. She could feel his gaze burning into her skin. "I do not avoid people," she said, though her pulse betrayed her. He studied her for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes unreadable. Then he straightened and said softly, "Come with me." She should have refused, but her legs carried her into the private elevator where he swiped a key that only he possessed. It rose beyond the corporate floors up into the hidden penthouse no employee had ever seen. When the doors opened, she stepped into another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering city beneath them, while leather couches and dark wood shelves surrounded a fire that burned low and steady. "This is where I come when the noise becomes too loud," he said, pouring himself a drink. He looked at her as though daring her to judge. "No one enters here, but tonight I want you to see it." Isla's heart hammered. He was opening a door no one else had touched. Vulnerability lay beneath the stone walls. Yet even here the tension between them was sharp, almost unbearable. He stepped toward her, the predator still present, but something else flickering behind his eyes. "I cannot think when you are near me," he admitted, his voice raw. "You are a distraction I cannot afford yet. I cannot let you go." She trembled, caught between fear and desire. "Then do not let me go," she whispered before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was explosive. He closed the distance, his hands gripping her waist, his lips crushing against hers with desperate hunger. The firelight painted them in gold shadows, their bodies colliding with urgency. For the first time, Isla realized this was no longer a game of power. This was obsession, and though a voice deep inside warned her that obsession could destroy them both, another voice whispered the truth she could not deny. She had already surrendered. The lion had claimed her, and the most dangerous part was that she wanted to be his. The city glittered beneath the penthouse windows, but inside Damian's world, the shadows were growing darker. Isla had thought the danger was only between them, the unspoken pull that left her trembling in his arms, yet the storm that followed was far more ruthless. Word of their closeness had leaked, and enemies who had been waiting in silence finally found their opening. It began with whispers in the press, a headline suggesting that Damian Voss had allowed a low-level assistant to influence his decisions, another article hinting that he was distracted, that his empire was not as unshakable as it once appeared. Isla saw the papers stacked on her desk, her own name buried in the gossip columns. She felt her stomach twist, but when she looked up at Damian expecting rage, she saw something else. Not anger, war. At the next board meeting, the tension was unbearable. Damian's rivals had sent representatives, men with polished smiles who spoke in calm voices but aimed every word like a dagger. They questioned his authority, suggested his decisions were reckless, implied that his empire was being weakened by a woman who had no place in his world. Each time their eyes slid to Isla, she felt the blade twist a little deeper. Damian listened without a word, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. When one of them finally said what the rest had been circling around. When a man allows desire to cloud judgment, entire kingdoms fall. The room froze. Everyone braced for the explosion, but Damian only leaned back in his chair, his gaze cutting like steel. Kingdoms fall when men underestimate the lion, he said softly, and the silence that followed was absolute. Later that night, when the boardroom was empty, Isla found him in his office staring at the city below. His jaw was tight, his chest rising with the force of barely contained fury. "They are coming for me," he said, his voice low. "Every enemy I have ever made is circling, and they will not hesitate to use you as the blade." Her heart pounded. "You think this is my fault?" she asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. His head snapped toward her, his eyes storm gray and blazing. "No, Isla, this is not your fault, but it is your danger. They will whisper lies, they will dig into your past, they will make you bleed if it means they can get to me." His hand clenched at his side. "I should send you away. I should end this before it destroys you." She stepped closer, her fear real but her resolve sharper. "And if I do not want to go?" she asked softly. For the first time, his mask cracked. The lion looked cornered, torn between hunger and fear. His voice broke on the words. "Then I will destroy anyone who tries to take you from me." That night, the proof of his warning came. As Isla left the building, a black car slowed at the curb, its windows tinted, its engine humming like a threat. A man inside lowered the glass, just enough to let her see his smile, cold and sharp. "Tell your billionaire that everything has a price," he said before the car pulled away into the night. Isla stood frozen, the city lights burning around her, her heart hammering in her chest. She had wanted to believe this was only about desire, only about the dangerous game between her and Damian. But now she understood. She had not just provoked the lion, she had become the weapon his enemies would use to bring him to his knees. The days that followed were a blur of tension, sharp words and silences that cut deeper than any argument. The black car, the man's threat, the whispered headlines, all of it swirled around Isla like a storm she could not escape. She tried to focus on her work, but every time the phone rang, she jumped. Every time a shadow crossed the window, her chest tightened. The mansion felt less like a fortress now and more like a cage with eyes watching from every dark corner. Damian had changed too. He became more controlling, more protective, demanding to know where she was every hour of the day. At first, Isla mistook it for care, but soon she realized it was fear turned into possession. When she pushed back, telling him she could not live like a prisoner, his temper snapped like lightning. "Do you think I can risk losing you when every vulture in this city is circling?" he roared, slamming his fist against the desk. His voice echoed through the office, but what shook Isla more was the raw desperation in his eyes. She stood her ground, her voice trembling but fierce. "You are not protecting me, Damian. You are suffocating me. I cannot breathe when every step I take belongs to you." For a moment, silence hung between them, like a blade suspended in the air. His jaw tightened, his chest heaved, and then he turned away, his voice breaking. "You do not understand. If they take you from me, it will end me. The words that should have melted her only deepened the ache in her chest, because they were not the words of love. They were the words of a man drowning in obsession. That night she lay awake in her small apartment, hearing every creak of the old pipes, every sound of the city outside, and wondering if someone was out there waiting. Fear twisted with longing until she could not tell one from the other. The following evening, Damian appeared unannounced at her door, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes wild. "You cannot stay here," he said, his voice rough. "It is not safe. Pack your things. You are coming with me." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I will not live in your world like some possession to be hidden away." He stepped closer, his hand reaching for her face, but she stepped back, tears burning her eyes. "You told me once I provoke you, Damian. But maybe I am not provoking you. Maybe I am showing you something you cannot bear to face, that you do not want me, you just want control." The silence that followed shattered him. His hand fell away, his shoulders stiffened, his face turned to stone. "If that is what you believe," he said softly, "then maybe you should walk away now." Her heart screamed to stay, but her pride forced her forward. She grabbed her bag, pushed past him, and stepped into the rain. Each drop was a knife against her skin, each step heavier than the last. She did not look back, even when she felt his gaze burning into her from the doorway. That night, Damian poured whiskey in his penthouse, staring out over the city like a king without a crown. His empire was intact, but his heart had begun to crack. And Isla, in her tiny apartment miles away, wept into her pillow, knowing she had left the lion wounded and alone. Yet even in the silence, she could not escape the truth. She had not ended anything. She had only begun a war inside both of them, and neither knew if they would survive it. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. But for Damian and Isla, every day was a battlefield of silence. She had left him in the rain, her pride leading her steps, but her heart breaking with every beat. He had let her go, though every instinct screamed to claim her back. Weeks passed, yet the distance between them only fed the fire. Whispers filled the business world. Damian's enemies saw cracks in his armor, and they struck harder than ever before. Deals he had once closed with a single phone call now unraveled. Investors questioned his judgment. The board pressed him with doubts, and in every meeting, every headline, Isla's name surfaced like a weapon sharpened against him. The woman who distracted the lion, the girl who dared to defy him. She had become his weakness, and everyone knew it. Isla tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer fit. Every time she stepped into the office, her co-workers' eyes lingered. Every time she walked through the city, she felt the weight of unseen eyes following. Then one evening her doorbell rang. She froze, her heart racing. On the other side of the door was a plain envelope with no name. Inside lay a single photo. Damian sitting in his office, his expression unreadable. Across it, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "He cannot protect you." Her breath hitched. Fear surged like cold water through her veins. She knew this was not a bluff. Someone was watching both of them. Someone who wanted to break them apart, not with words this time, but with threats that cut deeper. The next morning, she stormed into Voss Enterprises and demanded to see him. His guards tried to turn her away, but Damian's voice cut through the air. "Let her in." When she entered his office, he rose at once, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with a force that made her chest ache. She tossed the photo onto his desk, her voice shaking. "Is this what your enemies do, Damian? They come for me because they know I matter to you." He stared at the photo, his jaw clenching, his hands curling into fists. "Whoever sent this will regret breathing," he growled. His fury was dangerous, but what terrified Isla more was the truth beneath it. She whispered, "I cannot live like this, Damian. I cannot keep being the weakness they use against you." His eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time she saw not the ruthless billionaire, but a man on the edge of losing everything. "You are not my weakness," he said, his voice raw. "You are the only thing keeping me alive in this war. Without you, Isla, there is nothing left worth fighting for." The words cracked through the air between them, leaving Isla trembling. Before she could answer, the office door burst open. One of Damian's closest advisors rushed in, pale and breathless. "Sir, it's the stock raid. Someone just bought out half the shares. It's a hostile takeover." The room spun into chaos, but Damian's gaze never left Isla. Even as his empire trembled beneath him, even as the lion was dragged into battle, his eyes held the truth that terrified her most. He would burn his kingdom to the ground if it meant keeping her. And as alarms of betrayal rang through the building, Isla realized the final battle had begun, not just for his empire, but for their love. The lion was wounded, the enemies were circling, and she stood at the center of a storm that would decide whether Damian Voss would rise again or lose everything, including her. The walls of Voss Enterprises shook with the weight of betrayal. Damian's empire, the kingdom he had built with his own hands, was under siege from every direction. Rivals circled like vultures, and the board whispered about replacing him. News outlets painted him as a fallen king blinded by desire. Yet in the eye of this storm, one truth burned brighter than all the lies. He could lose everything and still survive, but if he lost Isla, he would be destroyed. The night the takeover reached its breaking point, Damian called an emergency meeting. The top-floor boardroom glowed under harsh white lights as men in suits gathered ready to watch the lion fall. Isla stood by the door, her chest tight as she heard the venom dripping from their voices. They accused him of recklessness, of weakness, of being compromised. One of them sneered, "She is nothing but a distraction, and because of her, your empire is collapsing." The insult was aimed at Isla, but it was Damian who moved. He rose from his chair with a force that silenced the entire room, his storm-gray eyes blazing. "You think I am falling because of her?" he thundered. "No, I am rising because of her. She is the only one in this room who dared to tell me the truth when all of you bowed your heads in fear. She is the reason I see clearly now. If you want to take me down, then come for me, but leave her name from your mouths, or I will remind you why they call me the Lion." The room went still. For the first time, the board remembered why they feared him. The predator had been provoked, but not broken. His declaration was more than defiance, it was a vow. That same night, the real enemy revealed himself. The rival behind the takeover arrived in person, a man Damian had once trusted. The confrontation erupted not in a polished boardroom, but in the darkened garage beneath the tower. Isla found herself there by accident, her steps echoing just as the men clashed. Damian's voice roared through the concrete. "You built this betrayal on lies and shadows, but you forgot one thing. I do not bow." The rival sneered. "Power is no longer yours, Damian. Your company, your fortune, your name, all of it is slipping from your hands." Damian stepped forward, his fury palpable. "Then take it. Take every dollar, every building, every title. I will build it again with blood and fire if I must. But you will never touch her. She is mine." The words cracked through the space like thunder. Isla's breath caught. For the first time, she understood that this was not about control, not about possession, but about devotion so fierce it could burn the world. He would lose everything else and still fight for her. The rival left with threats, but no victory. The next morning, headlines blared about the chaos, the Empire's uncertain future. Yet inside the penthouse, as dawn spilled gold across the city, Damian pulled Isla into his arms, his voice rough with exhaustion, but steady with truth. "Let them take it all. I do not care. You are the only empire I will ever need." Tears filled her eyes as she pressed her forehead to his. "You are not the lion they fear, Damian," she whispered. "You are the man I choose. And I am not afraid." In that fragile dawn, the war outside still raged, but between them, peace settled like fire turned to warmth. He had been the untouchable billionaire, the wild predator, but she had provoked him, challenged him, broken his walls. And in the end, it was not power or wealth that defined him. It was love, raw, dangerous, unstoppable. The world would remember Damian Voss as a lion, but Isla would remember him as the man who surrendered his crown to claim her heart.